Hello everyone, I haven't made one of these videos in quite a while, but the US Shogi Championships was over this past weekend and there was an incredible game. That was the very last game of the entire tournament between Takeshi Yoshikawa, who was actually the winner of the US Shogi Championships this year, against Kazuhiro Nishikawa, who is an active professional 6-dan player. And so we always have this commemorative game or ceremonial game at the end where the winner gets to choose a pro to play against. And they also get to choose their handicap. And in this game, Yoshikawa chose to have no handicap. And at least Nishikawa insisted that at the very least he give the handicap to Yoshikawa that he gets to be sente. So I want to give a little bit of context on Yoshikawa. He is an 8-dan. Yes, you heard that correct. He's an 8-dan on Shogiwars. So he's, top amateur level. He's in the US, I think, for studying medicine of some sort at Johns Hopkins. I didn't really get the details around that. Was a super strong player, and they played an amazing game. We also got to hear both of their thoughts on the game, what they were thinking during the game, in some commentary afterwards, and I wanted to really share that. So the game starts out with Yoshikawa playing a pretty standard static rook game. He's a static rook player. And Nishikawa is a very classic ranging rook player. So it starts out in a very standard way. And with pawn 5-6 here, and with the bishop up on 7-7, Yoshikawa is basically telling Nishikawa, hey, I'm going to go for Anaguma. So we're going to get to kind of see how a professional player goes after an amateur's Anaguma. And here with the Lance 9-8, Yoshikawa kind of confirms, yes, Anaguma time. And immediately Nishikawa goes and puts his silver on 5-4, threatening to attack the bishop head here. And so here you generally have two options. One is to defend with the pawn, one is to defend with the silver. I think pawn is probably more common, but Yoshikawa decides that he wants to use the silver. And the game slows down a little bit here as Yoshikawa gets to go ahead and castle into his Anaguma. So this is actually a pretty interesting part of the game right here, where Nishikawa decides to push his pawn to 4-5. And during the match, actually, we had another pro, Ishikawa sensei, who's actually come to New York already a few times. I've met him a few times. He's a retired professional, and he was actually doing the commentary. And right around here, he had expected Nishikawa to play knight to 3-3. This is actually a very common move combination where you bring the bishop back so that you can activate the knight instead. And then potentially you can use the bishop this way. Whereas if you keep the bishop on 3-3, the knight kind of never gets used. But Nishikawa surprised him and played bishop to 3-3. And he actually came and explained this after the game. And he said it's actually much more common and good to jump the knight to 3-3 if you've kept your pawn back on 4-4. And the reason why is that it leaves the 4-5 square open, so the knight can develop all the way to 4-5. So if you end up pushing the pawn to 4-5, you don't really want to jump the knight, because this is now going to block your bishop, and the knight itself is blocked. It can't do anything. So he says this is actually something he's studied quite a bit, and so if he plays pawn 4-5, it's specifically to bring the bishop back to 3-3. So it seems a little bit weird. He moved the bishop back just to move the rook up, but he said that this is actually something that he's studied very specifically. Yoshikawa is going ahead and making his Anaguma castle, and actually I think this was the first moment that Nishikawa thought for a bit, and he goes ahead and starts his attack with pawn to 3-6. And this was talked about by Ishikawa sensei, is that one of the main ideas with this shape, with the rook and the bishop instead of the rook and the knight, with the pawn on 4-5, is to bring the bishop actually to 4-4 and attack the rook this way. So obviously it's also on a really nice diagonal looking at the king, but this is kind of one of the main ideas for putting the bishop on 3-3. And interestingly, Yoshikawa also commented in the postgame that he had actually never seen this idea before, pushing the pawn to 4-5 and putting the bishop back on 3-3. So he was also not 100% sure what to do, and he's trying to play it a little bit more cautiously because he wasn't sure. And again, even here, interestingly, Nishikawa goes with the bishop. He has to retreat the rook, and then he pushes pawn to 4-6. And this is actually the first moment, I think, in the game where the commentator pro Ishikawa was genuinely surprised. Where before he's like, okay, yeah, you might put the bishop here. I haven't really seen it, but it doesn't seem like that bad of a move. He said this move completely caught him off guard, and he didn't even consider it. And even in the post game, Nishikawa sensei was saying he also had not considered this move at all until it was played, which is extremely rare for professional players. And really the idea behind this is if you trade bishops and try and make your toking, there's this silver drop forking the bishop and the rook. And it's obviously very clever. It makes it so that it becomes hard for you to promote that pawn. Even if you promote the pawn first, it's kind of the same thing, right? So what Nishikawa interestingly said is when this happened, he realized that he had actually made a move order mistake earlier. And it was because usually when he plays this, the structure is slightly different, where I think the pawn is already pushed on 5-5 and he's already had to retreat his silver. And so this idea of trading the silvers to drop it on 4-5 isn't there. And what he said was what he realizes, instead of going bishop to 4-4 first, what he should have done is actually push this pawn first. So his whole idea actually with this bishop to 4-4, pawn to 4-6 combo was that when the pawn gets taken on 4-6 and the bishop comes rook has to retreat, he gets to take this pawn on 3-6, and when you defend, then the rook can actually take this pawn and it's getting in, and this is quite good for Gote. So this was the idea behind what he wanted to do, but because he transposed the move order and brought the bishop out to 4-4 first, what happened was in this moment, Yoshikawa was able to ignore the pawn and bring the silver to 5-5. And Nishikawa said this was the first moment in the game where he thought, ooh, I did something wrong, and if I don't play perfectly, I might actually lose this game. So he was forced to take, and now here he can't promote the pawn. He has to decide what to do in order to deal with this silver drop on 4-5. Now, the AI shows an insane line here, which is knight to 3-3. This move didn't even get discussed in the post-game analysis. There was a lot of talk about how good this silver 5-5 move was because of this silver drop, but they didn't actually talk about this potential knight to 3-3 move because it seems now kind of obvious. Okay, it defends, right? But the big problem is the silver drop on 3-5, but it turns out that actually you can kind of just take. And now this is super hard to defend. You actually can't defend both of these threats, the rook promoting on 3-9 and the pawn promoting on 4-7 and making a toking. So actually, this knight 3-3 was probably the best response to this silver 5-5 and silver trade. Nishikawa decides he wants to be a little bit more active. And what he decides to do is take the pawn on 3-6. And at first, this looks like a big mistake because it doesn't actually solve this silver 4-5 problem. It looks like the fork is still there. But actually, in this case, the rook can just promote, and it's going to be able to take the rook if you take the bishop. So that was his idea here. So Yoshikawa goes ahead and blocks it. And Nishikawa decides to offer the rook trade. The rook trade happens. If you're Yoshikawa, yeah, you probably wanted to prevent something like this. But on the other hand, he's going to get to drop his rook in first, potentially. And this bishop is not actually doing a ton all the way over on 2-6. Now, very interestingly, Yoshikawa does end up playing rook to 4-1 here. But the engine actually really likes playing just taking the pawn on 4-6. And this type of move actually got discussed quite a bit a little bit later on, and I'll point it out. But this is the type of move where you're basically just saying, you know what? you can figure out what to do. I'm going to pass and like give you the move, and you can figure out what to do from here. And, there's not anything super active that Nishikawa can do other than drop the rook in. But then Yoshikawa is going to be able to counter drop the rook in. And he actually has a lot of decent moves that he wants to play, mainly this pawn 4-5, opening up the bishop and attacking the 5-3 square. But Yoshikawa also decides to go a little bit more active, decides to drop the rook. And Nishikawa goes ahead and drops his rook. And then Yoshikawa goes ahead and plays this pawn to 5-4 move. Nishikawa goes ahead, makes the toking. And here, it was a little bit tricky of a move here. Even Ishikawa, the commentator, said, oh, this is a one-mover, obvious, bishop takes 1-1. But interestingly, if you look at the engine, it really likes gold 7-9. And the reason it likes gold 7-9, it's not just blindly castling into Anaguma. It's actually a tactical resource for why you want to move gold to 7-9 here. And the main idea is that the threat that Nishikawa has, the biggest one he has, is to get the token to 5-7 and attack this gold while the rook attacks this gold. And try and disconnect these so you can take one of them. The problem for Nishikawa right now is that this rook stares at the rook. And so what Nishikawa wants to do is get this rook off of this and then move the token. And so the way to counter that as Yoshikawa is actually to move the gold so that the silver defends it and not this gold. And that way, if Nishikawa plays a move like gold back to 5-1 to kick the rook, Yoshikawa can actually afford to go ahead and take this knight because the token to 5-7, he can actually just take it with the gold. So this is a little bit of a potential missed opportunity for Yoshikawa. He decides to actually take the lance on 1-1. But again, you can't really blame him. The pro commentator is saying, oh, this is, I would take, on 1-1, and I think it's like a super strong move, and I'd be a little bit worried if I were Nishikawa. But again, the problem with this move is that Nishikawa can play gold to 5-1, kick the rook out, and then play this token to 5-7 move. But actually, even Nishikawa didn't see that move. I'm not 100% sure why, because even both of them were talking in the post game that clearly, like, the question is, okay, how can you move this rook and get the token over? But instead, he played just taking the pawn. This is another one of those moves that I was mentioning earlier that got talked about quite a bit, which is you're handing the turn and kind of like giving the tempo to your opponent and saying, hey, you figure out what to do. And they talked about this, the pro during the game, but also in the post game, that this is a scenario where there's a couple moves that seem pretty obvious for Yoshikawa, which is to take the knight either with the rook or with the horse. But actually, both of them feel pretty bad because if you take with the rook, then the token is coming to 5-7. And if you take with the horse is no longer on this like strong diagonal. And you kind of lose the defensive influence of that horse. It's a super strong piece on defense. So obviously, even here, the engine is saying it wants to play gold 7-9. I think the engine even likes taking the knight. I think it's saying probably you have enough time to get back onto this diagonal because your rook stares at the rook. It's something. It's obviously very complicated. And even if you look at the evaluations for the engine, it's like a very slight difference. And so, okay, it's only on depth 20. So who knows which is actually best. But interestingly enough here, Yoshikawa makes his first like kind of definitive mistake. And I believe at this point, this was actually the move where Yoshikawa went into Byoyomi. And I think he played his move. The time control was 15 minutes plus 40 seconds Byoyomi. And I think he played this with 39 seconds on the Byoyomi, which is he retreated the horse all the way back to 7-7. Now again, even here, Nishikawa had the move gold 5-1. With the exact same idea, but he did not play that. He played the second best move, which when it was initially played, I thought Richard, who is a member of the New York club, he was the one looking at the stream on his phone and inputting the moves into the Lee Shogi, which is what we were projecting onto the screen for everybody to watch at the venue. I thought he had misclicked something or did something wrong because I saw this pawn drop on 3-1 and I just thought like, what the heck is this move? It's not even blocking like the critical direction that the rook is looking at. And did the rook even want to take this knight because of this toking move. It was so confusing to me. But it turns out there's a really nasty idea behind this move, which is, let's say, okay, you do something kind of slow. Okay, if you pass, there's this idea of silver drop on 4-2 trapping the rook. So this is like idea number one. And so obviously Yoshikawa sees this, and so he decides to just go ahead and take the pawn. Okay, I need to undo this move. He decides to go ahead and take the pawn. But now he runs into the problem of Nishikawa gets this move toking to 5-7. And here Yoshikawa decides to go ahead and just take the knight and give up the gold. But actually, Ishikawa was saying that this is probably a very good decision, because even though you're kind of just giving the gold away, as long as you take back with the gold here, the Anaguma is still quite resilient. There's not enough pieces in Nishikawa's hand yet for him to be able to get a decisive attack. So this was an interesting way for Yoshikawa to play, and he said it was very obvious that Yoshikawa is very used to playing Anaguma and really understands how to play as Anaguma, where you can give away some of the material advantage as long as you get a good attack on the other side of the board. So Nishikawa also understands this, so he goes ahead and collects another piece, takes the knight, and then Yoshikawa makes probably his second, I'm not going to say big mistake, but the clear mistake, which is this pawn drop on 5-3. So Engine suggests things like lance drop on 8-6, maybe playing a bit of a defensive move with gold to 7-8. So you can see pawn to 5-3 is all the way down here at 5th. And the main reason why this move, I think even during the game, I felt this was kind of an odd move. And the reason why I didn't like it is because this bishop isn't doing anything except for defending this diagonal backwards. And you're kind of playing into the one thing that this bishop is doing. And actually, this even hurt him pretty quickly. And I watched the stream back, and in about 3 moves, you could tell he knew that this was not the right sequence, that he didn't find the right sequence. So obviously, okay, his plan is to go ahead and drop the knight back and attack with the pawn. But Nishikawa finds, okay, he's not going to go all the way back to 2-6. He can go actually to 3-5. So now the bishop can actually attack the gold. And this is when Yoshikawa started to scratch his head a little bit, like, ooh, like maybe I did something a bit wrong here. But okay, like he's here now, so he has to go ahead and continue the attack. He plays pawn drop on 5-3. Nishikawa goes ahead and runs the gold. And Yoshikawa decides, okay, let me attack the bishop while threatening silver drop on 5-2. So you can see from the eval, like it's already a little dicey, and I played around with this a bit. Even if you play some of these top moves, the engine eval just goes down. So this is almost really just a depth problem, what you're seeing here. It's actually not that big of a mistake to play this move. The interesting thing, though, is here, Nishikawa actually makes a very big mistake, and he plays the move pawn drop on 3-4. This is actually kind of a similar move to that pawn drop on 3-1 earlier, and he actually commented after the game that he was really happy with his move pawn drop on 3-1, and he loves playing these kind of like weird looking pawn drops that are kind of just like there to get in the way, basically. And you can tell he kind of did it again here, right? Like this pawn isn't defended, it's not really doing anything other than blocking the rook. But in this case, it's a really big mistake because it basically just loses the tempo, right? The whole point of what Nishikawa was doing is he wanted to threaten silver 5-2 with the tempo. And eventually, this bishop is going to sack itself for this gold anyway. So the engine just wanted to do it now. There was no real reason to include this pawn drop move. But okay, he goes ahead and drops a silver win. And to Nishiyama's defense, the reason why this is so, why the mistake kind of hurt is there's a bit of a trick coming in a few moves that he just didn't see. So he goes ahead and starts his attack with the silver drop. Silver takes, dragon takes, and here is the trap that Yoshikawa laid with his move sequence, and that kind of Nishikawa kind of allowed with the pawn drop. It's silver takes the gold on 6-1 unpromote. It very specifically needed to be without promotion. And this was actually another moment where the commentator Ishikawa was like, oh, I didn't even consider taking without promoting. I was thinking you want to promote so that you can drop the silver here. But actually, this is a really good move. And Nishikawa also said the same thing, that he was not expecting the silver to take on 6-1 without promoting. And the reason why this is such a big threat, this is actually a Tsumero, right? So if Nishikawa doesn't see this and it's like, haha, I'm just going to take the gold now for free. You can't take back with the horse because it'll be a mate. It's actually just straight mate. And I wanted to kind of try and show some of the lines. The line that they showed in the post game, because obviously Yoshikawa played this line knowing this and seeing this. It's actually not the fastest mate, but it's actually a really nice one. So I wanted to show it, which is to go ahead here. And I think he sacked the gold here. Yeah. Or he sacked the silver. I think he sacked the silver, actually. King takes, and then also sacked the pawn. But actually here, normally you can run the king to 7-2. Now technically this is also still mate. I think they misread something in this area because you can actually just go ahead and drop your pieces in and still mate the king. But both of them commentated that the really good mate was actually to then also sack the toking, because it brings the king back. And now you can start with this move, horse to 4-4. And now you just have a very classic Tsume type Tesuji here, where you go ahead and line these silvers and bishops and horses up. And this is obviously a very straightforward mate. So this was the trap that Yoshikawa laid. Nishikawa saw it at the last second. And so unfortunately, he had to actually respond to this. And the main reason why he needed to, or the main reason why you wouldn't want to, and why Ishikawa initially thought, that this was a good attempt, but it's not going to be quite enough. And then Ishikawa would try and attack here, is that you don't really want to allow that gold that they just took to get dropped back on 7-8, because now the attack is actually starting to slow down and thin out. But because this was actually a Tsumero, he really had no choice and he had to take it, and then the gold got to be dropped back. And so basically once this gold got dropped, Ishikawa would say, okay, like we have a real game on our hands right now. It got really exciting, even in the venue as well. And one of the comments that Nishikawa made after the game is that if you're playing against Anaguma and you get in this type of situation, you almost never want to just run your rook away. You kind of just need to commit and sack your pieces off. And so that's exactly what he did. He goes ahead and takes the gold with the bishop. Horse takes, dragon takes, gold takes, and then silver drop on 7-9. So here, the engine just wants to run the gold. But Yoshikawa played a very interesting move, which is lance drop on 8-8. So the engine thinks that this is a mistake, but both of the pros at the venue said they thought this was a very good practical decision. And the reason why is if you take the gold here, you're actually at least 2 moves away from mating this king. There's no way that you can check this king. So that means Yoshikawa now has the initiative. And if he can find a good attack, he can potentially win the game. It turns out that there isn't a good attack, but when you're both in Byoyomi at the end of this game and you're looking for a practical resource, they both said that they thought that this was a very good one. And interestingly enough, Nishikawa didn't play that. Instead, he played bishop drop on 5-5. So this is a Tsumero, right? So like I had mentioned, if you take the gold, it's not Tsumero. And you have to be very sure that your opponent doesn't have an attack. And so even the active 6-dan pro couldn't read through all of the variations to know for sure that Yoshikawa didn't have a decisive attack. And so he decided, okay, I need to actually be a little bit more aggressive here. And he went ahead and dropped the bishop on 5-5. Obviously, this is threatening to take here for mate. So here, bishop drop, take. And Nishikawa decided to drop the bishop on 5-6. And Nishikawa actually stated even himself that he realized after making the move that this was actually quite a big mistake. And he was really afraid that Yoshikawa would play bishop drop on 7-8. Because in this case, if you take the gold, he takes the bishop. And again, you're now very far away from mating the king because he even has the bishop defending a bit. And if you take the bishop, gold takes, and now the silver is not going to be able to take the gold. It can take the lance, but it's not that strong. And the gold is threatening the silver. So if this would have happened, this would have been pretty much a full comeback for Yoshikawa. Interestingly enough, Nishikawa presented this move to Yoshikawa. I was like, oh, I noticed that you had this move. And Yoshikawa responded, I saw this. And Nishikawa was shocked. He was shocked. He was like, what? You saw it. Why didn't you play it? And he said, well, what I saw was if I play this, I thought you could just take the knight. And when I take with the pawn, you can just take my gold. And you're hitting this, and I have no attack, and I'm going to lose the game. And Nishikawa said, oh, interesting, because actually, if I take the knight, you can actually ignore it and just promote the pawn, and your attack is much faster, because taking the gold and then this is way too slow. And when Yoshikawa saw this, he was shocked. So this endgame was really rich, really complicated, really difficult. There are some slight mistakes made on both sides, but that's kind of sometimes what makes a really good and exciting game, right? So unfortunately for Yoshikawa, he saw this defensive resource and just didn't quite read through the variation perfectly. Of course, it's Byoyomi. You only have 40 seconds. But this was really his best chance because even though the engine says minus 3.1 and it's still in favor of Gote, even Nishikawa said himself, once he saw the potential of this bishop 7-8 move, he thought he had made actually a critical error and that he would have lost the game if this bishop drop was played. Okay, so unfortunately for Yoshikawa, he misread slightly and didn't see it. And instead, he played rook drop on 4-1, hoping that this is a Tsumero, essentially. Interestingly enough, obviously you can see in the engine, this is not a Tsumero. And the engine is saying, just take the gold and chill. You're completely fine. But again, in 40 seconds of Byoyomi, even Nishikawa said he couldn't read through everything. And he had already seen that Yoshikawa is very capable in the endgame of finding these long mates with that silver takes 6-1 unpromote move, that he was actually scared here that he might miss something. And so he played it a little bit safe and went ahead and defended with gold drop 5-1. So obviously in a faster time control game, you're in 40 seconds Byoyomi, it's actually a pretty good practical decision to just go ahead and play something that you know is safer. But he did comment after the game that I would have loved to be able to read through the whole thing and just take the gold. It's a little bit disappointing that and he said he was a little bit disappointed that he couldn't read through all of it and see that, and that it was a little bit of a weak move to defend here. So Yoshikawa goes ahead, plays the best move, and takes. Nishikawa takes back. And here things got really exciting because Yoshikawa sacks the silver. And, we were watching this without an engine on. Some people had an engine on behind us, but the commentary didn't. And most of the people watching didn't have the engine on. And we thought, whoa, he's sacking the silver already. Is there some sort of mate that we're not seeing? Because there's not an obvious mate here. And there actually isn't a mate. But apparently this is actually a really nice attacking resource. Not specifically in this instance, because when you give your opponent a silver, they have a mate. But in general, it's a nice tactic that you can kind of keep in mind to play, which is when you pull this king closer, now pawn drop 5-2 is actually a Tsumero. I can't remember the exact line, but yeah, trust me, it's a Tsumero. I believe you go here, and then you just sack, and you're able to drop a bishop here. And the reason why you can't do this in the opposite order, to say, if that's a Tsumero, then surely just promoting the pawn is the Tsumero. Why would you sack the silver first? But if you do this first, and then drop the silver, the king can actually just run. It can ignore it because, or even run to 9-2, because the token is actually blocking the dragon from taking on 7-2. So that's actually the problem with promoting the pawn first. So he sacks the silver, king takes, he makes his Tsumero with pawn promotion to 5-2. But yeah, you can see it in the engine. There is a mate in 21 here, and Nishikawa does not miss it, takes the lance, drops the gold on 7-8, trades off all the pieces, drops back the rook on 4-8. And once it got to here, even Ishikawa, the commentator, was like, okay, yeah, like this is surely a mate. I think he said technically, like, if he would have dropped a bishop or a silver, maybe the mate was a little bit harder. But when it's a gold, it becomes a little bit easier because you can sack the silver on 6-7, king takes, knight drop, and when the king runs, it's just an obvious rook sack because you're going to get 2 golds in hand. And if the king takes the dragon, you're just going to be able to drop 2 golds on the head for an easy mate. And this is where Yoshikawa resigned the game. Wow. So this is probably the highest level game I've ever seen in person, certainly at one of these US Championships. Obviously, we've had very, very strong players win and play in these commemorative matches before, but I don't think we've ever had anyone at the level that Yoshikawa's at. 8 dan on Shogiwars is absolutely insane. I believe the current amateur Meijin in Japan is an 8 dan in 3-minute games on Shogiwars. So that really kind of shows the level that Yoshikawa's at. And he said he's going to be in the US for a few years and he's going to participate next year. So we all have our work cut out for us catching up to him, or at least trying to make sure that when we play him, we give him a good game. So yeah, I just really wanted to put this game out there because I thought it was a great game. We got like really great insights from Ishikawa during the game, and then also from both of the players in the post-game analysis that we got to listen to. It was just so interesting to kind of hear their perspectives. And then even for me, I got this extra level of putting the moves back into the engine and seeing where they were right and where they were wrong. Actually, I even forgot to commentate on a really interesting line earlier on in the game. But yeah, so hopefully you enjoyed this. I'm thinking I'll probably start making some more videos again. And actually in the game in Class A, my first game in Class A, I was actually matched with Yoshikawa and played him in a game. So if I can try and piece together that game from memory, I'd like to try and go over at least the part that I remember, because I got into a very interesting position where I was down a clean bishop, but the game was still even. Probably not the type of position you want to put yourself in against an 8 dan on Shogiwars, but nevertheless, obviously an interesting game, and hopefully you can look forward to me covering that in my next video. Thanks so much.